Let's talk film. Streaming services, well, you know, they're pretty well known for reeling you in with a little watching moment, binge-worthy television and movies. And I think that possibly it's the number one thing to come out of the pandemic, that the blockbuster films, the old classic, the sitcom TV seasons that got you through those social restrictions and you still might be enjoying to this day, but something else has caught your eye. There has been a huge influx in documentaries about the natural world, to crime, to society, to celebrity. And it's not just on the streaming services. From the big screen to free-to-air television, has there been a resurgence in documentaries? Let's take a look at this. Joshua Belinfante is a filmmaker here to take a closer look with you this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Kaya.
Do you have one documentary that stands above all others?
Oh, my goodness. There's been so many great suggestions. For me, The Act of Killing by Joshua Oppenheimer has always been a film that I say, if that's the one documentary you watch, make it that one.
Why?
It is just, you watch it and it is stranger than fiction. What the filmmaker gets away with and what he shows through these criminals reenacting their atrocities that took place in Indonesia is just awe-inspiring. And it's a really great balance of poetic types of filmmaking with, you know, factual, but also completely emotional, illuminative truths. So it's just a stunning film. And I think it only came out in about 2007. So.
Yes, so it's not that old.
No, that's right.
Although some of these documentaries that people are sharing, you know, they are not old, but they are, you know, aged a little bit in the way that time goes by. Is that the power of a good documentary? We can still learn from it even decades on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think documentaries, especially like some of the ones that people have mentioned, you know, Super Size Me and Inconvenient Truth or Fahrenheit 9/11, these films really do have staying power, and people do look past, you know, the image quality and the resolutions changing over the years in terms of the technical stuff. People at the heart of it, they really want a great story to believe in. And I think now more than ever, when truth and facts and media are constantly under attack, people really want stories to believe in. And I think that's where really the heart of documentaries lie for many people.
Are we seeing a bit of a resurgence? Am I right in that?
I think so. I mean, I certainly hope so. I mean, as a documentary maker, I've got a vested interest in that answer. So for me, it's a really exciting time that there are so many streaming services, and now people are getting access to these films, some of which for the very first time. And it really does show you just the depth of amazing films and media that are out there. And you know, I can't even begin to name all of the different streaming services now. And it's just a really exciting time. And I really do love the idea that there is this newfound interest in you know, factual-based entertainment, for lack of a better term, because people not only want to be entertained, but they also want to be educated in some ways.
Yeah. What do you think it is? What's driven that?
I think the stigma around the educational documentaries diminished over the last few years. I think looking at people like David Attenborough with Planet Earth, people want something sometimes to switch off, but also to learn something about the world around them. And I think also now in the last few years, I mean, the glaringly obvious thing is the pandemic, and people are limited. They can't travel and see the world in the same way that they used to. So documentaries really do become a window to that world that's been cut off for many people.
Have we seen the art of documentary making change much, Josh?
Definitely. I mean, if you look back to the history of documentary making, it all kind of really started off as observational filmmaking, where the filmmaker didn't prod too much on the subject and they just filmed like a fly on the wall. And I think that's still very much in favor by many filmmakers. But I think, you know, because of filmmakers like, you know, David Attenborough and Louis Theroux and, you know, films like Fahrenheit 9/11, people have become more comfortable with the idea of the voice of the filmmaker guiding them in these films. So now I think we're in a really exciting space because people, and more specifically documentarians, have embraced multiple different ways of telling a story, that there isn't just this idea that there's one way to tell a documentary. So I think that's really exciting as well.
Yeah, and we do kind of become loyal to characters. We become loyal to the documentary makers as well. A lot of people are very loyal, and when Sir David Attenborough brings out something new, they are there ready to watch it. Same with Louis Theroux. Even I know Louis Theroux's gone into the podcast space, and it's been, a great success. We like these people. We want to be part of their lives a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also driven by social media at the moment, especially like a lot of filmmakers are probably joining social media that, 10 years ago probably would never even have dreamed of that. So I think there is that link now to want to be close to the people that are making things and hear that behind the scenes story. And sometimes as well, filmmakers are more and more including those behind the scenes moments in the filmmaking. I mean, one film that springs to mind is obviously Catfish when that came out, which was quite.
Have you been in my lounge room? I've just watched season 1 from 7 of Catfish. I am still halfway through season 7. Josh, what do you know about me?
Oh my goodness, yeah, no, I haven't seen you on Gogglebox, have I? No,
not yet. I'm still waiting for the call out.
Yeah. I mean, Catfish was a really unbelievable film when it came out as well, and there's a lot of stranger than true moments in that film, and it's a lot of people kind of said, oh, it's not a true documentary and all this kind of stuff, but it really did in some ways popularize that reflexive filmmaking that filmmakers had been doing since Sherman's March, and even before that, with Ziga Vertov and all these other people that I can bore you with that were doing these techniques, but a long time before it kind of came into the zeitgeist of, oh, we have reality television, so now, filming the process of actually making the film is something that can show audiences, hey, what you're watching is true, you can believe in it.
Yeah, and a little bit of taking it away from sort of celebrity and big picture and fame and focusing a bit more on everyday people. And we are all curious as to what someone else is doing and how they're living.
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely the rise of reality TV has really shown that. For better or worse, there's a lot of problematic things with. I've worked in reality television. I've worked across observational documentary, and I think it is a space that people need to be aware. As we are getting closer and closer to some of these people, that they are just regular people. So things that we say online can be very hurtful as well. So there's many stories of people who've come out of these series worse off because of being attacked on social media and stuff like that. So it's not like we watch a great action film and we can talk about, I don't know, Captain America in a Marvel film and in a flame war. It's like, this is a real person that, has a family or whatnot. Even though the actors playing Captain America do too, it's not exactly the same when we critique a character, whereas we critique a real person.
What about from the filming side of things, not just the storytelling side of things? How have we seen tech change what we're able to actually show in documentaries as well as tell?
Yeah, it's a really fantastic question. I think right now we are in this amazing space where filmmakers are using lots of different emerging technologies to tell stories. I actually look back to a film that only came out a couple of years ago, Todd Miller's Apollo 11, and they had access to totally new archive of that moon landing, and they had to invent technology to actually scan that material. Then we've got films like They Shall Not Grow Old, I think it is, and they actually were able to recreate war photography and actually bring it alive. So Peter Jackson had access to just this amazing new tech, which is just stunning. You see these photos just come alive for the very first time. So it's a way of actually re-engaging with history, retelling stories from history through the tech. And there's lots of different ways of doing that now, which I think is just a really exciting time to be a filmmaker.
When we are up against so much television and so many movies and the YouTube world as well, have documentaries had to reinvent themselves to keep people engaged? Because there's nothing worse than a dry documentary. Ugh.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can watch a lot of very dry business skills documentaries, or even some of the films in the self-help space can be very, dry and boring and didactic. So I think there's a fine line and a balance that the filmmaker needs to strike. And I think it's very important that filmmaker asks themselves the question at the very start of it, what do I want the audience to come away from with this film? But also, what's the story that I want to tell, and what are the techniques I can best use? There's nothing to do that. There's nothing worse than seeing a documentary filmmaker do something because it's a fad or something like that, like a 3D documentary. I've only seen a handful of 3D documentaries in my life that, in general, but also that actually needed to be in 3D. So that's an example of a tech that can be grossly misused.
Yeah, I feel like that and reenactments, for the sake of having reenactments, to be able to say the word reenactment down the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I think the reenactment issues are a really interesting one. I mean, I've been rewatching a lot of films that have dealt with reenactment lately. Errol Morris being obviously the filmmaker that kind of pioneered that approach, where people, for the first time when they saw reenactments in The Thin Blue Line, they thought they were watching a real murder, and they didn't realize that it was reenactments, and they criticized him for not interrupting the murder. He said, this is reenactment, guys. And, there's lots of films that have done that now, and obviously The Act of Killing being a great example, but also films like Anna Abramovsky's Forbidden Lies, which came out in 2007, I think, really used reenactment as a meta-narrative. And it was just fascinating to kind of see how the filmmaker just took what this, Norma Khoury, the author of this very problematic tale, took at face value and kind of reenacted that for the audiences to see. And I think if they didn't do that, well, you wouldn't have gained that insight into that film in the same way.
It is 9 minutes away from 10 o'clock. You're hearing from Joshua Belinfante, a local filmmaker. We are talking documentaries today. If you have one you want to share with me that you think everyone should watch at least once in their life, I'd love to hear from you. 1300 33 12 33, or you can text me 0487 99 12 33. That idea, Josh, of not getting involved is one that I know Sir David Attenborough has talked about a lot, that when you are there in that moment filming something, no matter how heartbreaking it is, especially when it comes to nature, there is only so much you can do while you're telling that story. There is a really fine line there.
Absolutely. There's a very fine line between intruding in what you're doing and your own personal voice as a filmmaker. I think it really depends on what story you're telling. Obviously, nature documentaries, you don't want to intrude in the environment. You don't want to interrupt the flow of nature. But if you're telling a story about something that can't really be shown, then sometimes there is scope to intrude, and sometimes there is scope to actually work with that participant to tell their story in a way that audiences can, be part of, and that story can be illuminated and evoked for them in a poetic way. So I think there's a fine line and there's a balance, and I think audiences are receptive to that. I think audiences want to watch documentaries in the same way that they watch narrative films. In some ways, they want to be enthralled in a story. They want to be, they want to see conflict unfold on screen. But that also leads to many ethical questions that the filmmaker has to ask themselves and of the film. And there should actually be that separation of the film from the filmmaker at the end of the day as well.
What's the future of this space?
I think the future, I'm always someone, I look back to what the past has shown, and I think, documentaries like The Super Size Me's and Fahrenheit 9/11, they can change the world. Documentaries can really make audiences question whether things actually happen that way. They can make them actually question themselves and say, what can I do to change things? What can I do to rally behind this issue or this cause? I think the future is documentaries taking hold of emerging technologies and taking advantage of things like social media as a means of storytelling. But I also think that traditional way of telling documentaries is not going to go away. There's many contemporary examples of Australian filmmakers just doing that traditional documentary and really creating a groundswell of discussion. One such film is Laura's Choice, which is on ABC iView, I think, at the moment, and I was lucky enough to see it last year in Perth. And that really did create an amazing discussion about the right to die, and it was a very, very emotional film, and it's a traditional documentary as well.
What are you working on in this space? Anything you want to tell us about that we should get excited about, Josh?
Well, absolutely. I've just finished my debut feature documentary, The World's Best Film, which has been streaming all over the world at different film festivals. So I'm really stoked for that. So stay tuned for when you can find out more about that and where you can see it. And I'm also working on a number of different projects. I'm editing a film about an Irish troubadour for another filmmaker, Enda Murray, and I'm developing a bunch of other films, basically. One about my great uncle, who was a Sonderkommando in Auschwitz, and then another one about a public speaker that took a drastic turn. So there's a lot of different balls in the air. You've got to kind of, be working on lots of different things at the same time. But I'm really excited for the future. I'm really excited to kind of keep building this community around my films and also helping other filmmakers with their projects too.
Yeah. Josh, really interesting to talk about this in this space, I think, as many of us try to get that window to another part of the world when we can't travel at the moment through things like documentaries. So thank you so much. Lovely to catch up again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Joshua Belinfante, their local filmmaker, local doco maker, works at the university as well.